Joining us now in our newsroom, we have Dr. Aaron Lodis. He is a professor of engineering at Purdue University. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we're talking about FDA approval. There's a process here, and I think it's important for our viewers to understand what that process is. Would you be able to walk us through that step by step?
Sure. So I think by this point, probably everyone's aware of the emergency use authorization that different vaccines have gone through. And now that that's gone through the approval, it's really a different bar. So approval is a higher bar. So that's FDA's, it's a full standard review process that any vaccine would go through. And, as FDA has reviewed all those data, which is really extensive data, there's longer term follow-up now available. They've determined that vaccine is safe and effective for preventing COVID-19. It's a little bit different from the emergency authorization, which was, again, a lower bar. Certainly FDA is still evaluating the safety and the benefit and the risk, but that bar for emergency use is just a little bit different. FDA is looking at, should the vaccine, do they expect the vaccine to be effective? And do the potential benefits outweigh the potential risk?
So I guess the first thing is the FDA is, of course, an independent agency, and they're looking at what they want to do is, like you said, it's a higher standard, of course, to get full FDA approval than EUA. What's the first thing they do? Is there do they sit in a room of 10 people? How large is this? Are the people involved? What kind of data are they looking at? So walk me through that.
Right. So in this case, there's certainly a lot of people involved because of the urgent need. And, a standard review, it may take a little longer. There may be fewer people involved. Here, FDA has really pulled in resources from all over the agency to try to help with this review to ensure they're moving as quickly as possible, but they're still doing a very thorough review of the safety data and the effectiveness data. And I think it's also important, it's not just clinical data that they're looking at. They're looking at how is the vaccine manufactured, how is it tested, and what laboratory studies are there. So there's a whole battery of tests and lots and lots of reports that they're evaluating beyond just the clinical studies that we've heard about.
And can you talk about these sort of different parts that they look at in a little bit more detail in terms of, like you said, not just clinical, but they're looking at manufacturing? That's interesting, like in terms of how we're going to distribute this or just the way in which it's been manufactured. I mean, are they looking at, is Pfizer up to code?
Right. No, exactly. They're exactly looking at that. The facilities that it's being manufactured in and the processes that it's going through, have those been reviewed thoroughly to make sure that the product they expect to be getting out of those products is repeatable. It's the same coming out every time, and it meets very stringent requirements. So you're not getting one batch that's too effective or too potent, and one that's under potent. And they're looking at the release. So what sort of testing do they need to do to ensure things like sterility, cleanliness? So just a whole round of reviews. And then you're looking at it in the laboratory testing. So what sort of tests are they running? And those are all standard tests throughout industry and throughout the vaccine manufacturers. And this process too, we've talked about the speed at which the vaccine was approved. So as different reports are completed and different testing is completed, those were provided in what's called a rolling submission. So each piece would be provided to FDA over time. So it's not like FDA has reviewed all this data in a month. They've really been looking at everything out there over a number of months, really probably over the past year. So as each piece was completed, it went to FDA. They could review that in real time, ask questions, get responses back. It's only been those final pieces of final clinical data that's been more recently submitted and reviewed.
So they look at are people assigned to different sectors?
Yeah, so within FDA, of course, you have different people who are experts. One's an expert in the manufacturing, one's an expert in labeling. There's multiple experts in clinical study design, safety, effectiveness, adverse events. So those people would focus on the different aspects of the submission to make sure that each piece of that meets the standards and requirements for FDA review or FDA approval.
So you had just listed the different sectors that people are responsible for and have an expertise in. Would you be able to give me just maybe in like a one line, this sector is this, they're responsible for this? Just elaborate a little bit on sort of the list that you had just given me. This is so interesting.
Yeah, sure. So If you think about the manufacturing, that's going to be someone who has gone through numerous manufacturing sites for drugs, for vaccines, likely over years, and they're looking for, for cleanliness certainly, and process controls, testing requirements, making sure everything is documented appropriately. So again, someone with a lot of experience who focuses on that area. If you think about clinical, you're looking at most likely a physician who's has an infectious disease background and would be an expert in what sort of data are necessary, what are the right endpoints, what safety events are important to consider, and which ones are expected, and when do those occur at a higher rate than we might expect.
And then what about you had mentioned manufacturing packaging, you had said, or, and then other ways, what about distribution, anything else like that, or?
So probably the main concern with distribution of this vaccine is temperature, so the storage. And over time, some of those requirements have been relaxed a little as more testing was available. So I think when the vaccine first became available under emergency use, it had become extremely cold, and then that was relaxed after more testing was completed. So I think that's an example how over time, more information is evaluated, more testing is completed, and we just learn throughout this process the best way to not just to manufacture, to distribute, to use the vaccine.
And then what about the research? Is there a specific research team that looks at all of this data? I mean, what do they, I mean, and then what are the outcomes that they're looking for? I know we said there's the clinical outcomes, like hospitalizations or sort of side effects, but also what else are they looking at in terms of the actual evidence that we have to date in terms of this vaccine, whether it can move forward for full FDA approval?
The two biggest questions really for any vaccine, any drug device, are safety and effectiveness. So is it safe and is it effective? And of course, that's always a balance of the benefits and the risks. So for this vaccine, there have been millions of people treated by now, tens of thousands in clinical studies, and looking at for an effectiveness, is it preventing COVID-19? I think we've seen more reports recently or concerns that maybe over time that effectiveness might be slowly decreasing, but it's still certainly far more effective than the no vaccine. And Pfizer submitted an application or a supplement to this application for a booster shot, which will be interesting to see how that review goes and what happens there. And then on the safety side, with any study, there's adverse effects. There's pain at the injection site. There's headaches, fatigue, and it's looking through all that data and evaluating how patients that were treated with that vaccine, how does that compare to those that weren't? Those side effects higher, lower? Are they high risk side effects? Something at pain where you've been injected. I don't think anyone's going to be concerned about that. But others, there may be a higher risk, and if those are occurring at higher rates, then FDA would have potential concerns there. And again, it's evaluating what are the benefits of receiving that vaccine and what are the risks.
Well, Dr. Law, is this, yeah, right. Safety and effectiveness is sort of right. It can't be effective if it's not or safe, right? I mean, you have to have both. It's so interesting that you point to the manufacturing and the cleanliness, and that each dose is exactly the amount that it needs to be, because that can make a huge difference in terms of, I don't know what the measurement is, but if those things are off, I mean, what effect could that have on a vaccine? Or if, let's say, it's not up to standard in terms of, I don't know, cleanliness or the way in which the machinery is, what kind of, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here.
So if you're thinking about potency, and you could consider a drug, a vaccine, I think it'd be similar. So if it were manufactured and for whatever reason it was less potent, or in this case, more dilute, let's say, it may not be as effective. So you're getting that injection, but it's not doing a whole lot because there wasn't enough of it there. It wasn't enough in that shot to do what it should be doing. On the other hand, if it's too much, if it's extra potent, there could be potentially, I certainly wouldn't know in this case, but potentially you might have a higher risk of different adverse effects if you're giving too much of a drug or too much of a vaccine in this case.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, yeah, that's so interesting, right? If it's diluted or if there's too much, I mean, that's going to make it's a big deal. And what are your thoughts? I mean, Moderna is sort of following in the footsteps of Pfizer. What are your thoughts in terms of the potential and in your opinion, the timeline?
Yeah, for the Moderna vaccine, I think their submission was maybe a month or so behind Pfizer. So, in my opinion, I would expect that they would likely be approved here in the coming weeks. Again, it was just a little bit behind in a timing perspective.
And what do you think about the having full FDA approval? I mean, that's a stamp. This is safe. This is effective. We've gotten these, best scientists here to cover all sort of sectors in terms of, how well this has, works. How might that influence someone's decision who might remain vaccine hesitant? What would you say to someone who, when this FDA approval, it really is a standard that is very thorough and a process that involves so many of the best scientists in their field? What would you say to someone?
So this approval to me should just provide more confidence that this vaccine is safe, it is effective. I think people might have been concerned before because they felt maybe it was still experimental or it had been rushed through or it hadn't really been reviewed. And I think now knowing that rigorous review and all the data that goes through and all the people that have reviewed it, I think people just need to have a greater level of confidence that they can receive the vaccine. It's going to be safe, it's going to be effective, and they shouldn't be concerned, they shouldn't be hesitant about it. And I guess I'd add too, there's lots of information you see out there on Facebook, on Twitter, and just make sure you're getting accurate information, whichever side of the fence you may be on.
Yeah, not a Dr. Facebook, Dr. Twitter, Dr.
Right.
YouTube, right? Anything else you'd like to add? This is so interesting, this process, right? I mean, you really sort of broadened my view of it. I, wasn't aware of. So anyway, thank you. And anything else you'd like?
It's been great to,
yeah, anything,
more information on an area people aren't often interested in. So.
No, I think it's very important that we understand this process. And anything else you'd like to add?
No, thanks for having me.
Okay. Oh, you're so welcome.